Great. So we are live now. So I also want to welcome everyone who's joining us on YouTube and Facebook, and to everyone who's here on Zoom. I'm going to go ahead and get started with the introduction. My name is Geneva Blackmer. I'm the interim director for the Interfaith Center at Miami University. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization that seeks to unify people through relationship building, dialogue, and social action. And we are based at the Miami University campus in Oxford, Ohio. And I'm very happy to welcome you today to Shared Themes, Metaphors, and Symbols in the World's Great Religions with Dr. George Wolfe. George Wolfe is a professor emeritus at Ball State University, where he served as director of the Center for Peace and Conflict Studies from 2002 to 2006, and coordinator of outreach programs from 2007 to 2014. He is a certified mediator and was trained to conduct interfaith dialogue at All Faith Seminary International in New York City, where he was ordained an interfaith minister. In 1991, he was awarded an open fellowship from the Eli Lilly Endowment, which made possible his first trip to India,
Hello.
where he became
Hi.
interested. Sorry, somebody.
Oh, yeah. I was just watching a program. Okay, bye.
Great to have you here. Um, Great. So the Eli Lilly Endowment, which made possible his first trip to India, where he became interested in the nonviolent philosophy of Mahatma Gandhi. Wolfe received his doctorate in higher education administration from Indiana University. As an educator, he frequently lectures both within and outside the United States on topics related to nonviolence, peace education, academic freedom, and the role of the arts in social activism. He has been a featured speaker in the Hall of Philosophy at Chautauqua Institution and has served as a panelist at the annual International Conference on World Affairs in Boulder, Colorado. He has also been a visiting scholar at Limburg Catholic University in Hesse, Belgium. In the spring of 2007, he presented peace education workshops in the island nation of St. Lucia by invitation of the Ministry of Education. Bishop William Swing, National Peace Educator Michael Nagler, and former Indiana First Lady Judy O'Bannon have endorsed Dr. Wolfe's book, The Spiritual Power of Nonviolence, Interfaith Understanding for Future Without War. An excerpt of his most recent book, Meditations on Mystery, Science, Paradox, and Contemplative Spirituality, was published in the July 2015 issue of the journal The Interfaith Observer. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Dr. George Wolfe to present this shared themes, metaphors, and symbols in the great world religion. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for being here today. And I am happy to give this presentation. It all grew out of my first trip to India, when I was exposed to many of the teachings of the Ramakrishna mission. Actually, I was exposed to them before I went there. I used to go to a center up in Michigan called the Lakeshore Interfaith Institute, which was a center run by devotees of Ramakrishna. Now, for those of you who may not know, let me get my PowerPoint working here. Ramakrishna was a priest at a temple, became eventually known for his teachings on the unity of all religions, that all religions were true and all religions lead to the same goal. And I was exposed also to Swami Vivekananda, who is noted especially for his presentation in 1903 in the Parliament of World Religions, where he said that Hinduism is the mother of all religions. When we take world religions classes, we're often exposed to the differences between the religions. And if you look at the religions from the different point of view, from each specific point of view, we find they have a lot of differences. There's different histories, different scriptures, different spiritual leaders, different approaches to worships, different holy lands, different holiday traditions, and so forth. So there's a lot of differences, and those are the things that are in the foreground. The values and the symbols and the themes that great religions share tend to be in the background, if they're covered at all, if they're noticed at all. And so I began to think that it was really important that we notice these similarities, and if they existed. And I was again intrigued by Ramakrishna's teaching of the unity of all religions. He is famous for using a metaphor, that the metaphor of the mountain, that we're all climbing the same mountain. And but we don't realize we're climbing the same mountain. We're on different sides of the mountain, so we don't see each other. And so we think we're climbing a different mountain based on how we describe it. But once we get to the top of the mountain, we see that we were all originally climbing the same mountain. It's sort of a variation, I think, on the blind men and the elephant analogy that's somewhat famous. So I like to elaborate on that metaphor a little further and say we're all climbing the same mountain, and the side of the mountain you're climbing on might be a pine forest, and the side of the mountain that I'm climbing on might be a desert. A side of the mountain that someone else might be climbing on might be a deciduous forest. Another one might be a prairie. So we describe the mountain we're climbing in very different ways, and we think we're climbing on different mountains. But when we get to the top above the timberline, we start to see each other, and then we realize that we are climbing the same mountain. All right, so I'd like to, before I continue, I just want to find out, has any of you in attendance already been exposed to the idea of common themes and symbols and metaphors between the great religions? And if so, what has been your experience?
I see we have a hand up.
Yeah.
David?
Yeah, I can say that my experience of the decades of seeking with different living teachers in Buddhism, Hinduism, Christianity, Islam has led me to that same conclusion. And what the traditional sources that you're using, Ramakrishna, Vivekananda, they're like, old hat. They're true and authentic and real, but I'm talking about modern teachers, gurus, that all this is taken for granted. And it's great that you're bringing it to the attention of folks who might not be into quote unquote new age associated yoga paths. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? I see another hand up.
Manek? Manek, did you?
Okay. Yeah, good morning over here, California. I also grew up in India, in the 40s and 50s, in the time of Mahatma Gandhi and all that. So, and we are living in an integrated neighborhood where Hindu, Muslim, Christians, living in the neighborhood. We used to exchange sweets, on our festival days, and know each other, know a little bit about each other's religion. And of course, we also, myself also believe in the concept that we are all, the founders of the religions, had given us almost the same or similar principles. What happened, the differences happened after the religions became institutionalized, and the leaders of some religions, interpreted differently, and sometimes kind of created more differences, in order for some of them to have more power, more money, whatever, type of thing. But I also believe in the unity of religions and that we have the common principles.
It's a good point you raised about the institutionalization, the effect of the institutionalization on religion. I think that has a lot to do with how the differences became solidified, I guess, in
Right.
social context. Yes.
Right.
Well, there's another hand up,
Mary.
Mary. Hi, Mary. I think you have to unmute. I'm not hearing you.
Yeah, you're muted.
Can you hear me?
We can
Okay.
hear you now.
Yeah, we can hear you now. Mhm.
I had a tragedy in my life that my religion could not address adequately for me, the religion I was born into. And so when I went back to graduate school, went to graduate school after the tragedy happened, I studied religion, and my PhD minor was in comparative religion. And I studied all of them, and I saw how the similarities as well as the differences. The essence was the same, but the symbolism and the form, so to speak, were different. Different expressions of what I think of as the one God and the one creator and the one universal being, however you want to describe God. And I found a different faith that addressed my needs. Just by chance, it just happened I was guided that way. I wasn't necessarily looking. I was just looking to find answers for why this tragedy had to happen and how to recover my joy after I'd lost it. So it was that event in my life that changed my life. I knew that I wanted to get to the truth of things and uncolored by denominations and different religions. And I think I understand now all of those things far better than before. And I appreciate the fact that you are trying to unite others, because I have been doing the same thing ever since 9/11. I started a group called Exploring Religion and Mysticism, and I bring speakers. Sometimes I talk myself, but usually I bring speakers of different faith traditions to show people that we're more alike than different. So I applaud what you're doing.
Yes, that's good. Oftentimes it takes an event to sort of jolt us out of our past paradigm to embrace a new paradigm. And oftentimes it is a tragic event, but it doesn't have to be a tragic event, but nevertheless, something which really lifts the veil in a sense, has an apocalyptic type of transformation within us. The word apocalypse actually means unveiling. Its association with violence and earthquakes and so forth are all is a misinterpretation of the original meaning of the word. At any rate, thank you all for giving me a sense of where you're coming from. Let me continue here. One thing about the one thing about the it presents the interfaith. By the way, I wanted to mention that you started a group. You mentioned to bring together people of different faith traditions to talk about their experience and sharing their experience. Well, we did the same thing when I was director of the Center for Peace and Conflict Studies at Ball State University in the year 2000. I started the year 2002. We started a group called the Muncie Interfaith Fellowship. I'm from Muncie, Indiana. So we had Muncie Interfaith Fellowship, which brought together people from the Ball State University campus and the community. And we had quite a diverse representation of various religious traditions. And a year after 9/11, we had a carry-in dinner, interfaith dinner, and like 125 people showed up at this church. Oh, actually, it was more than that. It was close to 200. And the minister of the church was absolutely amazed that there would be this type of interest. And that started really a continued program where we had interfaith dialogue meetings and also interfaith worship services on a fairly regular basis. Okay, so let me, so I think that's a very important thing, that we have groups that people come together for the purpose of this kind of discussion. We need to, of course, if we're going to do this, we need to embrace the concept of what's been called an open canon, that all sacred texts can be consulted and potentially and given equal merit. And all religious and philosophical traditions have contributed to what I call the collective wisdom of humanity. And I think this forms the basis of the creation of a new discipline of what I call interfaith theology. We study theologies, but they're usually, again, rooted in a particular specific religious tradition. The study of common themes and symbols and metaphors helps to create the groundwork for what we call interfaith theology. At any rate, when I was in India the second time, and I was asking questions before I came to all this conclusion, and had this experience of underlying connections between the traditional religions. I actually went to India to study Hindustani music. I learned to play tabla, and I was studying Hindustani music. And I took a tour when I was in Calcutta, which now is Kolkata, and was taken to, as a part of the tour, the Ramakrishna temple. The temple that Ramakrishna was the priest at. And then the next place we visited was across the river, which was the Ramakrishna mission that Vivekananda had established. And there's a huge temple there, which is designed in such a way so as if you look at it from one perspective, it looks somewhat like a church. From another perspective, it looks like a mosque. From another perspective, it looks like a Hindu temple. The architecture is such that it symbolizes this bringing together and unity of all religions. What I found is that the idea of the unity of all religions was fascinating to me, but I was asking questions, what's the evidence for that? What are the specific ways you could show and that's happening, or that is the case? And so I went back to my hotel room, and then I had this, what I consider to be a revelation, a personal revelation, that I would find the answers to my question in the symbols and metaphors in the various scriptures and so forth. And so that's what led me on my search, and started the search where I started to look at various texts and various religious traditions from this open canon perspective, looking for common themes, symbols, and metaphors. If one place to start, a good place to start is the examples of core values that are shown among the great world religions. And here I have a list of some which I can read off to you. All of the great religions embrace some form of the golden rule. Many associate light with God, divinity with wisdom, the divinity or wisdom, and darkness with ignorance and losing one's way. Each emphasizes forgiveness in some form of penitential practice or season. Each encourages a form of reflective interior prayer or meditation. Each teaches humility, that a person should disengage the ego and act from a level free from self-centered interests. And each religion calls upon its followers to share their wealth and to help the people in need. I think it's interesting, you can take some of these, like for example, the various forms of the golden rule, various statements of the golden rule. And some of them state the golden rule in the negative. That is to say, I'll give you some examples here. In the Mahabharata, it says, "This is a sum of duty. Do not do to others what you would not have them do unto you." Okay? See, that is stated in the negative. The Buddhist rendition is similar. Treat not others in ways you yourself would find hurtful. Sometimes this is called the silver rule. If it's stated in the negative, it's sometimes called the silver rule. In the Jewish tradition, Rabbi Hillel is credited with stating the golden rule as the essence of the Torah. What is hateful to yourself, do not do to your fellow man. That is the whole Torah. The rest is commentary. That's a famous passage that's often quoted. Now, in the Gospel of Matthew, quotes Jesus as presenting it in the positive. So whatever you wish others to do to you, do so to them. This is the law and the prophets. So there was a shift there for some reason. Jesus is credited as changing it and stating it in the positive. And it's interesting to ask the question, well, why would he do this? Rabbi Hillel was supposed to have influenced Rabbi Jesus. And why would he, and Rabbi Hillel was highly respected in the time of Christ. And so why would he would change it to the positive? That's probably a pretty radical change at the time. And so it's interesting to ask the questions, what are the advantages and disadvantages of stating the golden rule in the positive or stating it in the negative? If anyone would like to comment on that, please raise your hand if you'd like to. Laura has a hand up, I see.
Yeah, I have given some thought to this golden universal rule and the positive versus the negative. And it seems to me that the negative is easier to follow than the positive. The negative just tells us what we shouldn't do, and the positive encourages to do something, while the negative just says what not to do. And it's often easier to be non-active than to actively pursue positive actions. I don't know if that's making sense.
Yes, it is. You know,
and
in fact,
a whole range of actions between what's hurtful to others and what is helpful to others. And there's a whole range of neutral actions. And the negative allows for all those neutrals and just says, just don't hurt somebody else in the process. Whereas Jesus is saying, do the positive things for the other. So, yeah.
Yeah, he seems to be saying, if you're going to err on the side of doing rather than err on the side of not doing. If you're going to take a risk, take it on the side of doing. Yes, I concur with your analysis there, very much so. Anyways, it's interesting to have those kind of discussions. This one, the emphasis on forgiveness and some sort of penitential season. Now, we're mostly familiar with seasons such as Ramadan in Islam and Lent in Christianity, Yom Kippur in Judaism, and so forth. We had one member of our interfaith fellowship who was from the Congo, and he said there was a tradition for someone in the African community who had done something to offend people and wanted to restore right relationship, that he would have a feast or a dinner, and they would have a pig and they would roast the pig, and the pig would be called the pig of penance. So everybody would be invited then to the dinner, and it would be the person who offended the community, his way of expressing his wish for forgiveness and for restoring right relationship to the community, which I thought was interesting to hear it from a tradition which wasn't considered one of the 5 great religions, and actually had a very much rooted in African tradition and from this person's perspective. Okay, so this is one way to start, is that they have these core values which the great religions share. Now we're going to look at some specific metaphors, and one is I'd like to start with is the metaphor of light. From the Christian tradition, these are quotes from the scriptures now. From the Christian tradition, God is light in whom there is no darkness at all, and that's from the book 1 John. From the Islamic tradition, God is the light of the heavens and the earth. You know, it's interesting that in the Quran, there's no metaphors that are used. They try to avoid this metaphors and symbolism, but there's this one place where a metaphor is being used. God is the light of the heavens and the earth. And it's kind of interesting that it's an appropriate symbol, because light is not something we can see, but it is something which makes possible seeing everything else. And so, and likewise, one does not see God, but the awareness, the consciousness which we have which is allied with the divine, is what makes possible for us to experience the creation. So I see that as a very interesting way of looking at the metaphor of light. And it's the one place in the Quran where you see a metaphor associated with God.
But he has other metaphors in the Quran.
Well, I don't.
Compassionate, merciful, all of these.
Say, pardon me. Go ahead, say that.
He has different attributes mentioned in the Quran. God is compassionate, he's merciful, all-knowing, all of these various attributes, as
It's
well as
interesting.
being the light.
Those are attributes, but they are not. They're not a metaphor. See what I mean?
I see what you mean.
Like compassion is not a metaphor, but yes, in that sense. So they're trying to avoid the symbol or the metaphor and get to the essence of what they're really talking about.
You're right. Thank you.
Which is it's an important idea. I think that's something which we all need to dig into. And so oftentimes the metaphor distracts from the essence, and we find that for people, especially people who tend to seek a more concrete interpretation. Okay, so the Jewish tradition, the Lord is my light and my salvation. From the Sikh tradition, God being truth is the one light of all. The Hindu tradition, the world of Brahman being the ultimate reality, the world of Brahman is light itself. And from the humanist tradition, I like to include that tradition too, which is born during a period of the Enlightenment. The word enlightenment contains the word light. So this whole notion that we have the light within the consciousness is within us is the light which needs to expand and illumine us so that we can perceive reality from a higher state of consciousness, a higher state of being. Okay. So now we go into some other metaphors like the metaphor of thirst, which is you have to dig a little deeper sometimes for these. Someone mentioned the Buddhist tradition. In the Buddha tradition, and this came from a book. I don't know if you're familiar with the book, What the Buddha Taught. It's quite a seminal work in understanding of Buddhism from the standpoint of teachings. Buddha taught that nirvana, a state of enlightenment, is life free from suffering. The root cause of suffering is said to be craving, as designated by the term tanha, which means thirst. Nirvana is known by the term tanhakaya. My pronunciation may not be exact, but which means extinction of thirst. Now, from the Chandogya Upanishad in the Hindu tradition, it says speaks of the knowledge of Brahman, having drunk of which one never thirsts. And in the Gospel of John, Jesus is quoted as saying, "Whoever drinks of the water that I shall give him will never thirst." So that's an example of the metaphor of thirst being used in three different traditions. And of course, the question we can ask is, and I could ask you to comment on this, are they talking about the same thirst? Is the Buddha and the Hindu sage or seer that wrote the Chandogya Upanishad and the author of the Gospel of John, are they talking about the same thirst? If you're seeking and from the interfaith on the interfaith path, you're going to answer that question. Most likely, you're going to answer yes, that there is a underlying commonality in this experience of the liberation from craving to be settled into the state of inner contentment. I always describe the inner state of inner contentment like if you're sitting in the sunlight, you don't have a desire or a craving for a candle, because the sunlight is simply so full that the thought of a candle or an external light just doesn't present itself. So too, sitting in the contentment of the inner light of consciousness, of unbounded consciousness, fulfills all, leaves us in a state of fulfillment where we find ourselves no longer looking outward to seek happiness or fulfilling a craving. Anybody want to further comment on that? You don't have to agree with my interpretation, by the way. Okay, another metaphor, a metaphor of treasure from the Chandogya Upanishads, is one not knowing that a golden treasure lies buried beneath his feet, may walk over it again and again, yet never find it. So all beings live every moment in the city of Brahman, yet never find him because of the veil of illusion by which he is concealed. And from the Gospel of Matthew, the parable in which Jesus is quoted as teaching, the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure buried in a field, which a man found and covered up. In his joy, goes and sells all that he has to buy that field. Now you can see that the common theme, the common metaphor here is treasure, but you get a different perspective on that treasure in each of those quotes, which is, I think, one of the advantages of comparing them, because now you're discovering a way of finding deeper meaning into the idea which is being addressed in those two passages. If you don't know both the passages, then you're going to miss out on one particular way of provoking you into thinking differently about the metaphor that you're used to hearing. All right. Any comments so far?
Are there other metaphors?
Yeah, metaphor of water. There's a lot of metaphors. It goes on and on.
In the Sufi tradition, the hidden treasure is within rather than buried out, in a field, like example of a field, but buried within us, and that we must search within me.
Right. And you can say the same thing about light. And of course, the Quakers are very famous for saying we have an inner light and we need to follow our inner light, learn to follow our inner light. So you can say the same thing, that the light of consciousness, the light of God, the light that gives rise to epiphany and realizations, which challenges the assumptions that we are making, that comes from an inner experience, an inner light. That's interesting. You can look at the story of the Epiphany in the Krishna tradition, where the Magi from Persia had once they found the Christ child. You can use that as a metaphor for them having found their inner light, because then they have a dream which tells them they should go back in a different way, not return to Herod. I don't know if you're familiar with the story. Most people are. And so oftentimes when we have an epiphany like that, it does change the direction we may take. It may change the direction we may take in life. It may simply change the direction of our thinking. And so it's a lot of the purpose of these symbolic metaphor called interpretations is to provoke us into thinking in new ways, and then thinking more deeply about our assumptions. Thich Nhat Hanh, in one of his books, it's the one called Peace is Every Step, I think. It talks about thinking deeply, looking deeply, getting the idea that we need to be, that source of inner epiphany and revelation needs to be provoked and triggered in order for us to have that experience. I saw another hand up here. Was there someone else that had something to?
Yeah, I was going to mention that you mentioned the Magi. So, I'm from the Zoroastrian religion. The prophet Zarathustra, who's teachings were read by the philosophers like Plato and Socrates, and they called him Zoroaster, in the Greek
Right.
version. But
Mhm.
yeah, the name of God that Prophet Zarathustra chose, Ahura Mazda, also means a Lord of Wisdom or wise creator, so there's association with wisdom. And then we have the symbol of fire or light, again, that we have a fire in our temples, or when we pray, we pray facing the sun in the daytime outside, or the moon. And so again, that is, the physical light representation as well as the inner light, the illumination
Mhm.
against the darkness of ignorance, thing like that. So we
Yeah,
have those kind of concepts.
I'm glad you brought that up because I'm going to talk about the metaphor of fire here in a little bit. And so I'll come back to that in a minute. There's a metaphor of water as a source of creation and which gives birth, because before a woman gives birth, her water breaks. And in the Rig Veda, it says, darkness was hidden by darkness in the beginning, with no distinguishing sign. All this was water. And in the book of Genesis from the Jewish tradition, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. The Spirit of God was moving over the face of the waters. Waters here can be one way to interpret it as it's a symbol of the unmanifest source of creation, the formless, unmanifest source of creation. But yet all the forms are contained within it. They just are not being expressed yet. And so we say they exist in an unmanifest state. Another metaphor that's often used is the metaphor of a seed. In the Rig Veda, you have the concept of Hiranyagarbha, which is the seed of creation, or the golden egg, as someone's called. In one of the Upanishads, it says the universe initially existed as seed. Well, you plant a seed, all the knowledge for creating a tree is contained within the seed. So you plant the seed, it germinates, and it gives it moves into a manifest state where it manifests the tree. This is the concept of unmanifest to manifest, and seed is also a metaphor which is used for that. It's interesting, the metaphor of seed. When you look at it from the modern science point of view, they're talking about the universe and 13.5 billion years ago or whoever was all contained in a singularity, held together by infinite gravity, and the singularity was supposedly smaller than a proton. That's like the seed of the universe, which then expands, and 13.5 billion years later, here we are. It's interesting how that metaphor seems to connect with the modern science perspective. Metaphor. Yes, go ahead.
The one you quoted about Genesis, it reminded me of the ancient Egyptian teachings on religion and their faith. I mean, whatever you want to call it, but that the beginning of creation, before everything came to be, there was water, and then things rose up out of the water, like the island, and then land, and then Osiris and Horus and Isis, the Trinity there, so to speak. But the world began with water and then was created out of water. So the water seemed to be primordial.
Yes, well, in addition to its symbol of an unmanifest state, if we stand on the edge of the ocean, we look out and see this, what seems to be like an infinite expanse, with nothing at the edge of the horizon. And then water is essential for life. We have to, all biological life as we know it has to have water to survive. So yes, it's a very powerful metaphor, and it has a lot of things we can read into it. And it's interesting that it's thank you for giving that source from the Egyptian perspective there. There's a metaphor of childhood innocence and acceptance in the Tao Te Ching, which is one of my favorite books. It's a Chinese scripture associated with Lao Tzu, sage Lao Tzu. Ever true and unswerving, become like a child once more. And in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus is quoted as saying, "Whoever does not receive the kingdom of God as a little child shall not enter." So the idea of returning to that state, and it's interesting. Meditation I often describe as a movement where in the mind, where we're disconnecting temporarily the cognitive faculties, disengaging the cognitive faculties, and trying to awaken the intuitive, insightful faculties. And it's the intuitive, insightful faculties which were very active when we were toddlers or before. We couldn't tell time. We didn't have language yet when we were 6 months old, and so those were the faculties through which we were perceiving the world. In our culture today, we are very much cognitively oriented. We live according to a time scale. If you take the test to get into college, the SATs are math and verbal, which is very much a part of the cognitive aspect side of the brain. The intuitive, insightful faculties aren't really dealt with much unless we're in the arts. We don't really get to know those very well. And so I see meditation as a way of returning or enable us to reawaken those faculties, which were very much a part of the way we perceive the world when we're infants. Okay, now we go to the metaphor of fire, and this is interesting because our friend here, who is from the Zoroastrian tradition, talked about the fire in the Zoroastrian temple and all that it is associated with. And it's interesting. When I have these interfaith groups and interfaith discussion, if someone talks about, say, the Zoroastrian tradition, and they talk about the fire and its meaning in that perspective, people get so involved in listening and learning about that particular viewpoint that they don't seem to make the connection between that and their own tradition. So the metaphor of fire is very much a part of Judaism and Christianity and in the Hindu scriptures as well. So you have, of course, Moses going up to the mountain, and there's a burning bush, which God is speaking to him through a burning bush. And in the book of Malachi, it says when the Messiah comes, he will purify the sons of Levi like a refiner's fire. In the Gospel of Luke, it says Jesus is quoted as saying, I come to cast fire upon the earth." Pentecost, story of Pentecost in the tradition has fire descending upon the disciples, spiritual fire, as it's described. But people don't. In the Bhagavad Gita, I think it says, "Nothing purifies like the fire of knowledge or the fire of yoga." So the symbol of fire is present, but if you don't point that out as someone who is mediating or facilitating an interfaith dialogue, people won't see it necessarily. You have to really explain it or tell it to them or expose it. And so the idea of fire has been connected in many ways. So let's go back. Oh, where is that? I got to go back. So contribute more or discuss more if you'd like on the metaphor of fire and what it means to you. Yes.
I think it means, purification.
Mm-hmm.
We are diamonds forged under pressure. The sensation of burning in the chest when our mother catches us stealing cookies out of the cookie jar.
Mm-hmm.
That's, I think, essentially the same dynamic as somebody just about to reach enlightenment.
Mm-hmm.
It's all working through stuff, working through personal issues to get higher and more profound perspectives on stuff.
If you're a blacksmith, you use the fire to temper the temperamental to make it stronger. It's another way to look at it.
Yeah, alchemy, the same idea. Sure.
Well, yeah, when I had a splinter in my finger when I was a kid, my dad would take a needle to get the splinter out, and he would put it in a flame first, a gas flame to purify it, kill the germs, so that if he broke the skin, draw blood, I wouldn't be infected. So fire, purification, strengthening, illumination, and so forth. That's all very powerful symbol. And it's important to note that in the ancient world, the elements, you had 5 elements of the ancient world. And you had, of course, earth, water, fire, air, and ether. And fire was the transforming element. In other words, you add fire to something, it changes its form. If you add fire to liquid water, it changes its form into a vapor, or add fire to ice, it changes its form. It's the same, it's still water, but it's water in a different form. So fire was a transforming element, in applying the metaphor to human spirituality. If you add spiritual fire, hopefully you will be changing the form of a person so that they become a higher or enlightened being. Yeah. Okay. Anybody else on the subject of fire?
I was wondering how fire and light relate to each other, because fire is light. And a lot of the light metaphors were based on fire, like the burning bush, for instance, that's light, or the burning of the sun. 1,000 suns rise in the sky, and that was Arjuna's vision in the Bhagavad Gita. That was light, but it's light from fire.
Well, the inner light and the inner fire. Fire is also associated with passion and with zeal, which can often, righteous zeal, I guess you'd have to say, because zeal can often lead us into a unfortunate direction. But
yeah, that's a good point, because in the 3 gunas in the Gita, sattva is light, which is the highest guna, while rajas was passion is fire. So they are different in that context.
Yes. I have to watch that. I have a lot of rajas in me, and so I have to watch my inner fire. Sometimes it gets out of control. But yes. And then tapas is the inertia. Yeah.
I just thought, fire and the sun, combustion is what results in light. Combustion, the actual act of burning and exploding results in light. That's kind of cool.
See, this is interesting. So now you make how you can take a metaphor. I hadn't thought of that. There are many things that some things have been presented here that I hadn't thought of, and that's the whole value of this. That it's not that my interpretation is complete. I'm finding out how much I can benefit from other people's perspective from it, and I think that's what we get a lot from an interfaith discussion group based on metaphor, searching for metaphor and symbols, and discussing different perspectives from different groups. I was invited several years ago to speak. There was a Ball State University got a grant to bring students from Africa, high school students from Africa, to America, and expose them to our society and ways of our university and so forth, in hopes eventually they would come here and study. But I was invited to speak to them, and I'd often get there would be a group of students from, say, Zaire, a group from South Africa, a group from Rwanda, or whatever, various different groups. And I would ask them, talk to them about wisdom teachings. So what wisdom teachings do you have that come from your own tradition, whether it be your family, whether it be your religious tradition? What wisdom teachings do you have? And I asked them to write them down. And I was surprised to see how many how many of the wisdom sayings that they were bringing out were similar. Honoring the father, honoring your ancestors or your father and mother, for example. Honesty is the best policy. I mean, all those things are very much a part of those cultures. They're expressed in different ways, told in different stories, but it was very, the students would really get into sharing their kind of wisdom teaching. So wisdom teachings is another way to bring people together and have discussions, interfaith discussions. Yes.
Sir, can I share my thought about fire?
Yes, please.
My name is Shukla Datta. I'm a Sanatani Hindu. Fire is one of the 5 important elements that is in the universe and also in our body. So we are one with the universe, and the universe is just an extension of us. In Hinduism, it is believed that Hinduism means Sanatani Hinduism. Fire is such a sacred. It is used for yajna, fire sacrifice. It is used for any kind of religious activities. And also fire is, we cannot imagine a life without fire, because fire is not only purifying, fire is, we cook on fire. Our body has fire. So fire is a purifying, someone wrote cleansing, but fire is, see, when our body, ash to ash, when it is said we came from ashes and went back to ashes. In Hinduism, the ash is when we burn the body, and that ash, it again, gets integrated with the 5 elements of the world, universe. So fire is one of the very, very important elements that keep us alive, or that we are part of.
That's right. What I always said, that fire, of the 5 elements of the ancient world, which you're referring to, is that fire, as I said, was the transforming element. It's the means through which you can change the form of something, whether it be for cooking, whether it be changing water from liquid to vapor.
Very truly said.
So the metaphor, if you apply this fire, the spiritual fire, to the individual, hopefully we can transform or change the individual into a higher being, or being able to live from a higher state of consciousness. Yeah.
Yes.
It's interesting.
Sometimes we say that fire up your ambition, or fire up your dream. That is, fire is an energy. And we call, in Hinduism, we call it Agni Devata, the fire god, Agni Devata.
In the book of Peter, 1 Peter or 2 Peter, I think it's 2 Peter in the Christian tradition, talks about at the end of time, the elements will be consumed in fire. And when we read that passage, and from a modern day perspective, people probably in the 20th century think of elements as being the atomic chart, or the that you learn about in physics and chemistry. We have all the elements, oxygen, hydrogen, and so forth. But that they didn't have the atomic chart 2,000 years ago. They're referring to the 5 elements of the ancient world: earth, water, fire, air, and ether, and space. And it's interesting how we have to go back. We have to realize that the language has changed. We're using words but the language has changed. In ancient times, also, the word for spirit and spirit and breath was often the same word. In the Hebrew tradition, when it says the Spirit of God moved over the face of the waters, the spirit there is ruach, which also means breath. You see, in Greek it's pneuma, which also means breath. There's a passage where Jesus breathes on his disciples and he says, "Receive the Holy Spirit." Breath and spirit were somehow related, but in our modern day language, especially in English, the word for spirit and the word for breath are 2 different words. We don't have the same word. So there's been a change in the language, which we need to be aware of and, in a sense, decipher as we make this kind of do this kind of research. Mhm. Okay, let me move on.
It's interesting to note that the word inspiration, when we breathe, but it has the word spirit right there in the middle.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's right. That's good.
I was going to share a story I heard from the Sikhism regarding fire, a
Mhm.
metaphor that the goal of our lives as humans is to become a perfect mirror for the divine.
Mhm.
So we perfectly reflect God in the world. And we do that. The process of rebirth was compared to a silversmith taking the silver and putting it back into the metal, continuing to burnish it. And again, every time the metal goes into the fire, it comes out more polished until it becomes a perfect mirror. And this is us. We are the silver that keeps going back into the fire, and the fire is our life in this world.
Yes, that's very good. You know, also going back to the metaphor of light, there's a story which I heard about when I was in India that we are all like the moon. The moon reflects the light of the sun, but some of us reflect it more or less depending on the phase. For example, some of us might reflect the light like a quarter moon. Someone might reflect the light more like a half moon, someone like a three-quarter moon. And then you have the sages, or the people who are the spiritual leaders of history, who are reflecting the light like the full moon. So we all reflect the light, and hopefully as we grow in spirituality, we become more like the full moon rather than like the quarter moon.
Can I just add, sir?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this you said about the moon, very interesting. It is said that how much we can absorb the light depends upon what is our mental capacity, mental attitude, and our advancement in spiritual path. So how much we can absorb, we will reflect.
Yeah. Good.
Thank you. You are so good.
Well, it's not me, it's the subject. Anyways, there are many other examples of metaphors which we have time to discuss, and we could go on and on. So the metaphor of the eagle is an interesting one. Metaphor for spiritual ascension. Metaphor of lightning. Metaphor for which is a metaphor of sudden realization. Metaphor of the blind leading the blind. That's those are comparative spats of passages in the Upanishads and the Gospels. The concept of the higher self and the lower self, how we can be awakened to the higher self from the lower self, in which we are preoccupied with when we're in ignorance. Then there's many paradoxical statements. There's parables, there's koans, there's riddles. I talked about the relationship in spiritual breath. So there's a lot of material here to delve into. We could have many more sessions on this. So
yes.
Now, here are some examples of shared themes that can serve as topics for discussion, which some prayer and meditation, humility, service, welcoming the guest or stranger, forgiveness, pilgrimage, different concepts of pilgrimage. As in the Islamic tradition, you have the Hajj. In the Hindu tradition, you have the Kumbh Mela pilgrimage. Various religious traditions, Christian and Jewish traditions, they go to the Christian Holy Land or the Jewish Holy Land in Israel, or just basically going on a retreat. You can consider going on a retreat a kind of pilgrimage. You can consider the walking a labyrinth as a metaphor or experience of a kind of pilgrimage symbolically. Ceremonial rites of passage, tithing, different versions. We talked about different versions of the Golden Rule, wisdom teachings, and so forth. So a lot of material which we can delve into, and obviously we don't have time to do it all. But what I'm trying to present here, again, returning to this slide, to do this, we need a holistic view, a way of viewing world religions, not simply as examining them from the historical perspective for their historical differences. And this requires us embracing the common concept of an open canon, that you can't be so attached to your one set of scriptures that you aren't able to reach out and embrace the scriptures of other traditions. That working from the assumption that all sacred texts can be consulted and potentially have equal merit. That all religions and philosophical traditions have contributed to what I call the collective wisdom of humanity, and that creation, the creation of this, or entering into this, is the kind of the creation of a new discipline, which I call interfaith theology. And this helps us move from mere tolerance to acceptance and to eventual appreciation. You know, it's one thing just to sort of tolerate someone who's from another religious perspective. You just kind of put up with them. Another thing to accept them, which means you accept them as friends and colleagues and so forth. But moving beyond that to appreciation means we actually delve into and see how we can appreciate the different perspectives that's brought to each of these teachings and metaphors and symbols. And that's really what we've been doing here. We've been engaging in an exercise which hopefully will help advance each of our individual appreciation for various traditions. And I leave you finally with this question to ponder. What have you learned from a religious, spiritual, or philosophical tradition other than your own that has deepened your understanding of your own personal religious, spiritual, or philosophical tradition? What have you learned from a religious, spiritual, or philosophical tradition other than your own that has deepened your understanding of your own personal, spiritual, or philosophical tradition? That's something I don't expect you to be able to answer now necessarily, but it's a question which I've enjoyed pondering, and it's helped to provoke a means of thinking more deeply about wisdom that's presented in each tradition.
Yeah, I found the Bhagavad Gita very enlightening, and I really appreciated that story and the moral behind it, and it really deepened my own understanding of karma and the need for things in the world that we don't understand, but it was explained so well. It helped increase my understanding and awareness, and I really appreciated that story. I came away really impressed with the explanation, shall we say, at the end. I really appreciated that.
Yes, well, thank you all for joining me. I really appreciate your comments and your contribution to our discussion, and I appreciate Geneva and the invitation to do this through the Interfaith Center of at Miami University. You feel free to make more comments if you wish. I'm looking in the chat here to see if there's anything. Geneva, are you with us still?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, I'm just sort of closing it out here, but we can continue discussion if you wish. But this is
that's up to you and everyone who's remaining with us on the call. If you have any further questions or comments, feel free. Otherwise, we can wrap things up. I know we're over the hour now. So, David, did you have a comment or question?
Yeah, I was going to say, probably more than one of us here is an interfaith minister. There are 3 or 4 well-known and a bunch of smaller interfaith seminaries, as most of you will know, around the country. Yeah, and I think this is a great dialogue, and by way of going on to a new stage, the particular school that I went to, the new seminary, their orientation is that activism of some kind is inherent in an interfaith orientation. which is you can argue that, but that of course advocates that we all do something in this direction. So yeah, this has been a great dialogue. I wanted to say that, and if anyone wants to dialogue about this sort of thing, then I'm open to it. I will put my email in the chat. I do spiritual counseling. That's my
David,
thing.
I also went to the new seminary.
Cool.
When did you go?
I graduated about 2 years ago now.
Oh my gosh, it's still around. I went back in like 1983.
It's been through some transformations, but it's still
I
there.
wonder if it's the same new seminary, or is it just the same name?
Well, it's
In New York City?
Yeah, it's based these days formally in Rockville, Maryland, more than
Oh,
anywhere.
is it? Interesting.
So this group I want is the oldest and best known new seminary, interfaith seminary. It was started by Swami Satchidananda and a rabbi called I don't remember what it is, but they came together
Gelberman.
and Gelberman.
Yeah.
They started this seminary in an act of communion, they say.
Yes, that's why I went to that seminary, and I knew Rabbi Gelberman and had met with him many times, and he always said that he went to the Hindu temples to find out what all his Jewish friends were doing. So, but he was very much a part of that, and that's a seminary that I went to. They didn't call it the new seminary then, because he had passed away. But yeah. Oh, very good. Yeah. It's interesting to talk about activism. When I was at Peace Studies, I started looking at the scriptures in ways that would be about activism. And, there's a couple of things. The nativity story in the Christian tradition, if you read in the Gospel of Luke, it refers to the Christ child as the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And if you look at it from the perspective of the Roman Empire, in the Roman Empire, you were allowed to have your own religion, but you had to pay homage to the emperor, to the Roman emperor first. You had to hold him highest, and then you could have your own religion. So when you read that passage, King of Kings and Lord of Lords in the Gospel of Luke, that's really a protest. That's really a protest statement. They're saying that he's above the emperor. And so that's an example of activism or a protest statement within that nativity story. And there are many other aspects to that too. But also in the Gospel of I guess it's John, I'm not sure which one, but it's the one where Jesus heals the man who's trying to get into the pool. He's crippled. He's trying to get into the pool to be healed, and he can never get in because someone else always beats him to it. And then he says, Jesus says to him, it's a Sabbath day. He says, take up your bed and walk. And he could have said, you can walk now because I've healed you, but don't take up your bed, because if you do, you'll be breaking the rule of the Sabbath and you'll get in trouble. He could have said that, but instead he said, take up your bed and walk. And that was breaking the Sabbath. So in a sense, it was he was asking him to create some good trouble. He was asking him to actually defy or create some civil disobedience against the current standards practice. And so if you look at it from those kind of activist perspectives, like was being suggested there, I think it's very you're led in some very in pertinent and enlightening directions, especially given that we need that kind of activism today in our world to stand up against injustice.
Well, thank you so much for all of your comments, everyone who's participated. Thank you to everyone who's hung on past the hour. We're grateful for you. I think a lot of people have had to go now, so we could probably wrap up for today, but I will send the recording out to everyone who registered. And George, if you had any additional resources that you want me to send out to all of the participants, please let me know.
Yes, I should mention that I should have mentioned earlier, this booklet I wrote several years ago called Common Themes in the World's Great Religions, which I still have available. And then I also have this booklet called Parallel Teachings in Hinduism and Christianity, which might be of interest to some of you. My book, The Spiritual Power of Nonviolence, Interfaith Understanding for a Future Without War, is a resource which you can get online. Trying to find it here. Yeah, here it is. Yes, this particular book. So, but yes, I can send out a list. There's a this is a topic I spoke on earlier through the Interfaith Center, was the Science, Paradox, and Contemplative Spirituality. Meditations on Mystery is title of that. And I believe we had a discussion on that, right, Geneva? That's still available.
Yes, it's on our YouTube channel.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm definitely happy to send out a list of resources and information about where they can purchase your books. And anything else you would like me to send out, I will make sure that we get that to everyone who registered today, as well as the recording. So thank you so much, George, for your time, for this wonderful presentation. And thank you to everyone who joined us here on Zoom for all of your contributions and the very lively discussion. So thank you all so much. And I hope
this was a great discussion. I really have enjoyed everybody's participation. So thanks very much. And you've contributed to my expanding consciousness today, or expanding consciousness, which is very much needed for myself as I continue to grow. Thank you.
So did you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
No, thank you all. So have a great rest of your day or evening, wherever you are in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Thank you.